in the gallery, and there was over 250 people came to see that because they hadn't seen it for years. And the three of us worked on it quite a bit. Rick worked on it more than the rest of us, but still, we all, with the three of us together, we had a great time. We had so much fun. They closed the doors because we were laughing so much. So we'll go on with this, okay? So this is a little thing about Mr. Grosjean. I will talk about him and then we'll move on to the others. He was born March 1st, 1861 in Mount Eaton, Ohio. Moved to Fredericksburg, Ohio in 1881. He married Nancy Armstrong in 1886. He had a daughter, Pearl, born in Wayne County, 1886, and she died in Allen County in 1858. Her daughter, Mary, was born in Wayne County in 1891, and she died in Allen County in 1894. She was 3 years old. He moved to Lima in 1882. He takes over the Musser Undertaking business at number 17 Public Square. That's just a general idea, that's where Rhodes College is now. His wife and girls came in December and lived above the store. Mary dies in 1894 of spinal complications, and the store moves to 114 West Market Street, and that's where the parking garage is now. This is where the parking garage is. If you look in the middle of the screen there, you'll see a white carriage with white horses and everything. He made that especially for use of any child in Allen County and the surrounding areas that passed away. He would send the carriage, the horses, the gentleman dressed in white to take the children to the cemetery. And we kind of believe he did that in honor of his daughter who passed away. He was elected vice president of state funeral directors in 1898. He was a delegate to the National Funeral Directors in Omaha in 1898 and the Legislative Committee of Ohio Funeral Directors in 1900. He sells out to J.D. Bennett and goes into the shoe business. He had quite a few interesting jobs. But he sells his undertaking business and moves to Buffalo, New York for the 1901 Pan American exhibit. He takes Noah's Ark with him, he takes the carousel, and he also takes the Cock Robin, excuse me, yeah. Which none of us have seen because we lost it in the flood in Dayton in 1913 when it was on loan. He opened his museum to display his dioramas, then returned to Lima and opened the shoe store. He was a founder and charter member of the Allen County Historical Society. In 1915 through 1916, he was the president of the Allen County Historical Society. He was also curator of natural exhibits from February 1938 until his death in December 38. Many of his mechanical marvels are still on display here at the museum. Please take a look at those. We like this picture. This shows the gentleman working in one of his workshops, and he just kept working on everything. He had 16 patents, but my wife thinks his best patent was a rubber bath mat. And I don't know if I agree with her or not, but yeah, if you're standing in, yeah, anyway. So then he opened a shoe store in 1902 with Herbert Hall, located number 55 Public Square, which was around the corner where he was. If you look at this picture here, back in the corner is Noah's Ark. If you bought a pair of shoes, he would turn that on for you. Now, when he was doing this, there was no music to it, there was no voice to it. You had to read everything as it came on. So the wonder we have now that it was redone, we could listen to music. We could listen to somebody tell the story of Noah's Ark. He started a humane horseshoe business east of the Detroit to Toledo and Ironton on Fountain Avenue. That is where the car wash is now. He founded Lima Cord, Sole, and Heel Company, and that became Grocor, and he had 5 different plants for that. A lot of his patents were on rubber sole shoes. When he first started making those, all the shoes the bottoms used to be leather. He came up with rubber on it, and all his different patents was the tread design as he changed them. He was curator of natural history in '38 and died of pneumonia on December 5th, 1938. This is a picture of the horseshoe that he was talking about. And what it is the top one's a horseshoe, the bottom over there left is another piece, and this one over here on the bottom right is like a little piece of rubber that they would put between the horseshoe and that other piece, so when the horse stepped down, it would cushion it. The reason they did that was we were getting more hard surfaces for the horses to walk on in the bigger cities. And so this was a big hit. They could not keep anything in supply because as soon as they sold it, it went off the shelves. But what hurt this was a guy named Henry Ford came up with the horseless carriage. So they didn't need horses nearly as much as this. The Lima Cord Sole and Heel Company in 1920 was located at Elizabeth and Pennsylvania Railroad. It moved to 117 South Jackson Street, and that's where you make that big curve on 81 to head out towards Schoonovers. And in 1937, he turned the business over to his son-in-law, Frank Mayer. This was a picture of the Grosjean building. This, I think this is kind of, to me, the most disgusting one that we have. This is the albino exhibit, okay? You know, where, different things. Down here at the bottom, this little animal here and this little animal here, when this thing was playing, they would be hidden, and then they'd jump, their heads would stick out. And it's like, man, something to scare the kids out of. And a lot of other ones, there was flying squirrels back here that would fly out. And we can't work on anything anymore because we realized after we finished Noah's Ark that all the arsenic was in it. We should have had self-contained, fresh air and everything. So that's why we're the Three Stooges now. So this was one of his things. And there's a mother bird, and that's a skull. That's a real human skull. And the head would be down, and when it turned on, the head would come up, and she'd tip over like she was feeding the person. And then this is a Ferris wheel. This was the first thing he made, and this turned around in a circle, and the birds riding in it would keep heads like that. There's a lot of different birds in there that you wouldn't see anyplace else. And this is the endangered species. I don't know the date, but my question is, did somebody kill these birds to give them to him, or did they find them dead and then send them to him? I hope they found them dead and then sent them to him. This is the patent, actually, of Who Killed Cock Robin, and we're not going to go through the description of this, except one thing. Down here at the bottom, oops, uh-oh. This is what you do. These actually are now she's one of the Three Musketeers. We're the Three Stooges. Keep going. Yeah, okay.
Did you want this one or this one?
Yeah, I want this one here. This is the bottom side of that, and I think Rick will get more into it later on, of how everything worked and turned and all in order and everything. It's just unbelievable the mechanism of this.
And wait a minute, and would you back up one?
Okay.
And
This one?
Yeah, and so this, point that out very clearly, because I have a different.
This disc right here controls everything, okay? And he had it, I know he had it in Noah's Ark and he had it in this, but I don't know any other ones. Rick will explain more later about how that works. So he had the miniature part was displayed in Grosjean's funeral home. 1905, Grosjean and Hall shoe store displayed the Seaside Fountain. And I've read about that, and it was really cool. There's no pictures of it or anything, but it was really, really awesome. 1910, Leon Lowenstein clothing store displayed the Mechanical Man, and it was arms like this, and he had clothes on, and it would turn so you could look at it and pick out what you want to have. In 99 and 91, he built Noah's Ark. This is the picture of it before we put the back glass on it, and actually before we really started working on it. And that's Rick. He's nodding away there, working on something. And there's I don't know who this is. We just had so much fun doing it. And looking at the mechanical things that Mr. Grosjean did on this is just unbelievable for the time that he did that. Rick, I think I'm done. I think this is yours.
Well, my turn, and what I'm attempting to do, what I'm wishing to do, is share with you some information that perhaps you don't know about the repairs that have happened to Noah's Ark. Things I didn't know. For one is that Noah's Ark came from Memorial Hall in 1955. We don't know what kind of maintenance and upkeep was done on it. But what we do know is in 1959, it apparently didn't work well because of the work that they had to do and the parts that they refurbished and replaced. So the issue is that the original mechanical clutches would have been wore out because they've been over 50 years old. And the clutches, the purpose of those clutches is to grab a sprocket that runs a bicycle chain. And that bicycle chain is what pulls on the Raven. There's another one that pulls on the Dove. And then the conveyor system that's unloading the people. Also, it's all run by, effectively, bicycle chain. Okay? So if you don't grab that tightly, you're not pulling the chain as much as it needs to be. So let's say it's slipping. So now the Raven, for example, is out of position. Well, it's not a real smart system. It's not a computerized system. So it doesn't know that the Raven is out of position. Okay? So everything has to be maintained mechanically. And in this time period of 1959, they decided that mechanical clutches weren't getting the job done. And I bring this up as it's somewhat of an interest or maybe a coincidence, because when we worked on this machine in 2017, when we got involved in it, we had the same problems. They were different root causes, but the same problem is that the Ravens, the Doves, and the conveyor system would stop. They wouldn't finish their whole process. So, which required somebody, some individual would have to go in there and try and straighten it out and pull on chains and put everything back in sync, which was a fruitless exercise because things are wore out and it's going to malfunction again. So clearly that was happening in 1959. And so they installed these electric clutches, which, by the way, electric clutches really weren't available till 1950. So this is new technology back then, state-of-the-art improvement, okay? And here is a photo of, this is a photo that was taken a couple of years ago, but that is the electric clutch that was installed in 1959. They work wonderfully. All of you who played with magnets know that magnets can get together and they hold really tight and they grasp. It's a wonderful solution, well worth the money. Good job, guys. Now, so if we fast forward, the problems and the reasons we got involved is that Noah's Ark was malfunctioning in very much, in many of the same ways it was malfunctioning in 1959. And what was frustrating is all these features that are supposed to be, it's the mechanized artistry of Noah's Ark. You know, it's not just a static photo or objects, it's mechanized. So all these things have to be moving at the right timing, for the right amount of, the right duration, and it wasn't performing properly. And like I was saying earlier, that if it malfunctions, then some human has to go in there and try and straighten it out. And I'm going to come back to that later, that we put a fix to that. Anyway, so all these items that are supposed to happen,
Whoa.
I was expecting something different. My memory failure. So things didn't work the way they were supposed to, and we didn't know why at this point. But the one thing we knew is that when visitors came in, they were always disappointed because most of you, perhaps, saw it when you were young. And you would bring in your grandkids or your children, and it doesn't work like you remember it. And so there were a lot of disappointed visitors. which is really why we got involved in this. Because it's pretty sad that the visitors are disappointed. That doesn't make a dozen happy. So anyway, so we started to look at this, not knowing what the root cause was, but the obstacle was that there's no documentation how this is supposed to work. Now, you know, I am not from Lyman, so I never saw it as a youngster. So all I know is I see a dark cabinet with no lighting, things don't work right. I don't know how it's supposed to work, okay? So we can kind of figure out what people say how it's supposed to work. And some of the things we needed to look at, which is the master controller. When I asked Mark to point out this, it was a rod with a disc on it. That's the main cam disc, is the master controller down inside the bottom of the cabinet where you can't see it. You can't get to it. And the other thing we learned is when we opened this up and looked at what could possibly be wrong, a lot of the original hardware that Grosjean would have installed for the mechanical operation is gone. So that was a surprise, because in 1959, when they replaced those clutches, they removed a lot of the mechanical apparatus because they converted it to electrical control. So that was a surprise. Anyway, this is a top view of the wooden disc that is really, or 100 years ago, was the master control. This is the brains that was controlling everything. And I said earlier that when we would power this up, and there's only two things that would work right, which was the audio comes on, and the other is the mountain that goes up and down. Well, that right here, this disc is a cam. These blocks are cam, are the actual cam lobes. And as this thing rotates, there are cam followers, they're levers that follow, and you can see the marks. So the only one that worked here anymore properly was what operated the mountain. This is pretty sad when I open this up, and what is all this stuff? Because a lot of things that were original from Grosjean, a lot of those levers are gone, things that would have been down here. There's electrical switches that have been added in 1959, and we don't have documentation of why it's this way. So this was, it actually was a lot of fun to figure out how's this supposed to work. Anyway, I will come back to this in a moment, is part of the reason that it was malfunctioning, that the arc wouldn't have worked properly, is because of problems with this wooden disc. So, we figured all this out in 2017, what needs to be done, but for about 9 months in 2017, we didn't work on it because we didn't have any funding. We didn't have any money. There was no plan to work on this. I mean, the museum didn't have plans on it. We just worked on that we want to work on this. Anyhow, so at the beginning of 2018, we had $500 that came from Nutrien. $5,000.
It was $5,000.
$5,000 from Nutrien, specifically to repair Noah's Ark. So we immediately, because we already knew what we were going to do, so we got started. First thing we did is removed all the old electrical things that, some of those electrical wiring and such was 100 years old. So if it was suspect, and you know how wiring, the insulation breaks down, and gets cracked and everything, so anything that was a risk, a safety risk, we removed all that old electrical. And the rainbow didn't work at all, so we had to get a new motor and put a system together to drive the fan. I don't know if you ever paid attention, but the rainbow is just a fan blades with colored stripes, all right? So, and the other thing is anything that was mechanical, like the chains, you know they all wear, just like bicycle chains on your bicycle, because the metal wears away, it effectively stretches. So now the chains are too loose and flopping around, so we had to take care of that. And as I said earlier, the magnetic clutches worked fine. That was a godsend there. So, a lot of that action on the previous slide, a lot of this is all happening in parallel. It's not a sequence thing. You do as much as you can do and then move on. Fortunately, because there was no illumination on this. That was the other thing that people were disappointed with. Visitors were disappointed to come and see a black cabinet. There's no lighting. So, you know, Ravens or something aren't moving right, plus it's dark, and I've had little kids look at me and say, what's supposed to happen? I wish I knew. But it clearly isn't happening, for sure. And so, that's what I mean, people would be disappointed, and the mother would be upset, and it was sad that they were unhappy. Anyway, so we were lucky. Mark found a solution for lighting that was just a home run, which was this particular kind of LED. And I hope you've all seen the arc, but the painted glass, the background and the sides are just a beautifully illuminated, uniform light that just really showcases the painted glass. And so we were able to install that. And then there's various, oops, nice. There's all kinds of little specialty LEDs and other lighting to thank you for things like the altar. Perhaps those of you who have seen it, the altar, the cave doors open up, and then when you see the altar inside, it actually looks like the fire's burning in the altar and such. So Mark found all these kinds of specialty lighting, like things for dollhouses and such, that improve the artistry of the lighting so we can tell the story better. Is added a motion detector so that if somebody walks into the room, a visitor, you don't have to get a docent or somebody to start the thing. You get close to it and all the lights come on so you can appreciate the beautiful painted glass. So the other thing, to get back to what I was saying, that the disc that was malfunctioning, it had so much play, and I brought just this mock-up, but what's happening is it takes 5.5 minutes for that disc to do the full rotation, to tell the whole story. Well, this thing in the Noah's Ark is all wore out. It's 100 years old. So everything is so sloppy, and you have even like what's called I call it a radial slip. So you push the start button, you hear the motor start, because you think the arc is going to start, and maybe the music starts, but no motion, because this is so wore and sloppy. And then, so if you can watch this, it takes 5.5 minutes to go around, so you know there's not much to see. But so if you can appreciate this, nothing's happening, and then suddenly it will, well, not that much, but then it'll jump. Well, that jump takes you a minute or so. I mean, it completely throws the timing off of the machine. the right solution, I mean, one solution in the old days is you'd have to replace that disc. We can't, because you have to completely disassemble Noah's Ark. You would have to take everything out of the cabinet, because that is at the very bottom. Because when he built that, it's all done in layers. Okay? Well, in today's world, with microprocessors, we don't need to do that. Because all you need to do is have a couple of sensors to monitor, and that's my choice, because actually my whole career was working with things like this. So what we do is the software with a couple of sensors monitors for motion of the rotation. And then the software logically says, you know, it's where it's supposed to be. So turn the lights on, turn on the audio. So the software is monitoring and taking care of all the play and sloppiness. So we don't have to replace 100-year-old components. I mean, for a couple $100, we saved tens of thousands of dollars of rebuilding. And we couldn't rebuild Noah's Ark if you wanted to. You'd need a huge area, and you have to lay everything out. There's no place to do it, even if we wanted to. So anyway, software is the ticket, and software is running. All it's doing is monitoring certain locations, and is running timing, and decides that everything is where it's supposed to be. And then the other problem was, just like in 1959, if there's a malfunction, let's say it's running and there's a power glitch. Now it shuts down. The machine has no idea where it's at. So a human has to go in and get everything put in place. Well, because of the software, so should there be a power failure, when you power back up, and then the operator simply starts it, and the machine will go back to its home position all by itself, because logically it's checking. And so once it gets to its home position, everything shuts off. Now the docent just needs to start it again, and it's completely in sync. So it saves a lot of aggravation and safety issues of having people reaching their hands in machinery. And anyway, that's my story. So I wanted to convey the story that there's so much that repeats in history. You know, it's 50 years later that we're having the same problems that they had in 1959. Different root causes, but the same problems, that the machine was failing and humans had to go in and straighten it out. So, with that, 1967, the sound system, a tape recorder was the first sound system they had. And you all recall 8-track tapes and such. That tape was brittle, it didn't last well. So in 1990, the solid state system is in, so it's digitized, and that system's gonna run for another 50 years for sure.
Yeah.
All right, so that's done. And something that really, if we're gonna run it at all, this really should be taken care of. All these sprockets and that chain, there's 2 sprockets here that seems to be causing problems. These sprockets are American. The rest of this is European. It's not American. Okay, which is interesting. So where did Grosjean get this? Okay, so just something that the board or someone should consider if you ever want to fix that.
I do want to start my part of it by saying, on the 7 months that we were out of commission because we had no money, that's when Mark started to dig in and ask big industry from his electrical experience, being a master electrician, and he netted us $5,000, which was like a godsend. And then I took it upon myself to try to find an engineering firm that would do this project for the museum. I lit on one clear up in Toledo. Okay, this is a true story. I brought their representative down here. He took one look at the machine. We spent 2 hours in there opening panels, looking at parts, him writing things down, 5 pages later, still writing things down. He goes back to his shop with his brother. They were the McGilver brothers up in Toledo. His estimate just for them to repair it would have been $25,000. And you see,
Larry, my name's Larry.
listen, as much as it's hard to be around Rick when he's talking about things, it's like, that's interesting, Rick. You know, it is like God lined up the stars, because here we have a sick machine, and here we have a man who knows how to fix it. And just by chance, he's a docent, so we can shame him into anything. We can promise him extra stars on his badge. Truthfully, I built 800 hours.
Yeah. 800
hours that man spent on this machine. That deserves a round of applause. I would go in and try to encourage him, and Mark would go in and try to discourage him, but we got along just fine. Anyway, as we got into this, it's like a time capsule, you guys. It was so... I want to compare it to opening a tomb, if I could. My job was to clean it, okay? And it was really hard to clean. And I'm not going to lie about that. The glass was so dark you couldn't even see it, like they were saying. It wasn't because of lack of light, it was dirt. Okay, 100 years of dirt. I'll proceed on with this. This was before it was cleaned. That's afterwards, with the lighting and the cleaning. Just to name a few parts, okay? This is the rotary indexing narrative that was on the machine originally by James Grosjean. It had 9 functions throughout the whole thing as you went on. But today I want to look at the creative side of his brain. You know, when you're in this time capsule and you're taking things apart, I'm watching Rick on the mechanical side. I'm watching Mark on the lighting side. And I'm sitting there trying to figure this out just on the artistic side. And I'm thinking, this was all one man. Yeah. He had patents. This guy knew everything. Seriously. He was an undertaker, like Mark said. He was a taxidermist. He was a cabinet maker. He built these cabinets. His father taught him cabinet making. This guy was genius. Seriously. And I taught art for 35 years, and I love the right side of the brain because it deals with creativity. And when I give problems to children and students, and over the years, see how other people handle that, it's so amazing to me how everybody can have the same problem and come up with a different answer. And Grosjean is no different, but yet he's unique. As I go through this, please feel free to ask me questions too, because it may make sense to you and it may not. But he was an inventor, okay? We already know he had a patent on who killed Cock Robin in 1899. The patent, if you know anything about patentry, it's not a big deal. It's almost like getting a copyright on a book, but it doesn't get you published. Okay, it's one thing to have a copyright, it's another thing to have a publisher. But the thing about Grosjean that amazed me so much was his passion to learn things. Electronics, mechanics, lighting, color, design. Why? Why would he get that involved? Well, he had a huge desire within him to communicate with others. He liked it when people understood what he was thinking, even without telling him, just showing him. And that's where this comes in with this ark. It's so beautifully put together. It's obvious he was generous with his time. He raised a family, involved in the undertaking business, the shoe store. He had a tremendous faith in God, and his community meant a lot to him. That's why he came back to Lima. And above all, he had a love for history. But the most amazing thing about him, in my mind, was he loved to tinker. So if somebody calls you a tinker, look at him and say, thank you. That's a compliment. After he built or started his thoughts on this particular spectacular machine, if I were to rate it on a level from 10 to 1, 10 being the hardest level of mechanical involvement, I would rate really Noah's Ark 8 or 9. Because the complexity, some of these levers underneath here, for example, there's a lever that starts down below here and goes across the entire bottom of the machine. That lever is counterbalanced, and it's over 3 feet long just to open the doors on that mountain. It's absolutely amazing when you get inside it. My mouth was hanging open half the day. Rick, you got to understand one thing about Rick. He had, because like he said, he was never raised in Lima, Ohio, never saw Noah's Ark, didn't know how it was supposed to work, first time in it. Rick actually had to enter the mind of James Grosjean to figure this out. Now that's pretty incredible when you think about it. I was watching him one afternoon with a stopwatch, and he was back there flipping the switch. Okay, and he'd stop it on the exact half second. And what he was doing was getting this timing down. Everything that he was talking about, all that slop and play had to be gotten rid of. So he was replacing all those mechanical functions with now electrical solutions. Fantastic job. But the impact of this, it had greater movement, there was a story, and in my mind, it was visual art. Okay, you can argue with me and I'll beat you up later, but it is visual art. There are 9 distinct, and I think I've got this right, if I can go on. There are 9 distinct functions that occur in 5 minutes, and 5.5 minutes. And that doesn't sound like much, but when you think about it, all he had was an electric motor that ran 1,700 revolutions per minute. He had no speed reducer that he could dial it down. So he had to slow motion. He had to slow movement. And then he had to figure out, well, how do I apply this? How do I time the events? And how do I synchronize them to make sense? And more than that, follow the Bible. Because this is Noah's Ark, yes? All of a sudden you realize when you're in the Ark that it's actually a three-dimensional orchestra. It really is. It's a sculpture. And it moves. And the things inside it move. It's filled with pageantry. There, like they said, music, voice. There's lightning to be seen and heard. There's all kinds of humor involved in it. If you listen closely and watch closely, what Grosjean did was absolutely amazing. And by the way, the interpretation starts at the story level itself. If you've read your Genesis in the Bible, you know, how long does the flood last? Who knows? Raise your hand. A lot of Bible readers here, I can tell. Okay, 40 days and 40 nights, yeah. And Noah built the ark, and how long did it take him? How many sons did he have? Grosjean could have started the story at the beginning of the story in the Bible. Where does he choose to start his story of Noah's Ark? After the flood. At the end of the story. Why does he do it there? Okay. Clear vision now starts to take place in his brain. He starts to settle these ideas. For example, an artist that makes a painting looks at their canvas first and says, I want this to be this big, and here's why. They make rational, logical decisions, most people. And the same thing's true with Grosjean. How big should that cabinet be? How deep should the cabinet be? Where's the best viewpoint when you look into the Ark? It's almost like a fish aquarium, if you will. Everything moves inside it, so why would I make it a scale this big when it should be this big? So all these things are weighing around in his head. He's juggling all this stuff as he builds it. So why show the evidence of death and destruction? Well, that is what happened. You know, people died, animals died, the face of the earth was completely flooded. But how do you show that without being grotesque? After all, if this is for children, and that was who he really loved to communicate with, how much do you show? You know, should we put blood and guts all over everything? Or so he adds things, clever things. This is a meerschaum pipe head, okay? I'm sure he went around and just picked things up off his shop. When I fixed this was a corn snake skin that was donated by John Appleseed. I asked Kevin Haver, I said, "Guys, snake skins around?" He said, "Sure, I'll bring you one." And so I put this in, the other one literally powdered in my hands. It was completely black. And by the way, that is the only thing I did replace. The rest is all original stuff. So, again, Grosjean with his sensitivity, it wasn't that he was gory, but there's a certain darkness to the Ark itself in the story, yeah? How does it end? After all of this, and we see what happens, the Ark finally lands on Mount Ararat. Well, guess what? It's pretty positive from then on, because after all, God's erased all the mistake from the earth now, and he saved the animals that were considered good, and he sustained a righteous family that's about to disembark from the Ark, and we celebrate the movement with all kinds of beautiful things. For example, there's a strobing rainbow at back. This is the fan blades. They turn at a certain RPM, and I'm sure that he studied the physics involved by putting those paint bands on 4 fan blades, and as they revolve, they strobe. You don't see the fan blades anymore, you see the banded color. Isn't that genius? Now I want you to keep one more thing in mind. This was 35 years after the Civil War. We got a guy playing around with all kinds of crazy stuff, and we were just barely able to survive as a nation then. Amazing. And it's also 50 years before Walt Disney came along. So when you think about this, don't just think, oh yeah, so I used a rainbow, you know. How would you do it? Even with today's technology. Pretty amazing. But the other amazing thing is, that rainbow disappears behind the mountain. It's like, how did he do that? These things were constantly a shock to me. And it all works, because you know what? How many of you saw Noah? Excuse me. How many of you saw Noah's Ark as a child? Raise your hand. Okay. If you were going to make a coin for Allen County, what would you put on the head and what would you put on the tail side? And in my mind, I'd put the Ark, because it is that popular. You're here today from the memory you had as a child. Now I want you to look at one more thing on this. As this Ark operates, I had, and Hannah deserves credit for this, she is a genius at what do you call this?
PowerPoint?
PowerPoint. See, I'm sorry, I know nothing about it, but she said, Herb, I can do that spiral for you. I'm like, wow. So she did, and she put it on exactly the way I wanted it. And this, by the way, does anybody recognize what this spiral is? Tom, tell us.
It's a shell.
Yeah, a nautilus shell.
The nautilus shell, it's considered in artistic forms the most natural.
Where was it? Good for you. Where was it originated?
It's a Fibonacci spiral.
Yes. Where was that originated?
I believe Italy.
Yes, ancient Greece and Italy. You're right. And these are golden proportions of everything from anatomy to nature. like Tom said, like the Nautilus shell. Now, superimpose that over this image that we have of our ark. If you start this ark up, one of the first things that happens, you know, and here again, I would love, Rick, if we could ever get that ark going again, it would be wonderful. But it's literally wearing itself out. But as you start this ark and your eye follows around, the lightning is right here. That's the first event out of the 9 events. So your eye is taken, obviously you look at the ark and you're kind of fiddling around when it starts. Boom, it all goes dark and there's lightning. Then from the lightning you go to the raven, and the raven goes back and forth. Then you go to that crazy dove. How would you make a dove fly in a container 100 years ago? How would you do that? So that complicated chain that Rick said on top is how that dove flies. So anyway, entering the mind of Eugene Grosjean,
James.
was he thinking that? James Eugene Grosjean, was he really thinking that? I want to show of hands who says, yes, he was. Come on, you brave people, raise your hands. You see, I have a theory about this. I think he was a lot smarter than people ever gave him credit for. Anyway, as for me and my house, for 5 generations, 5 generations of Lima people come to see the ark because we have a love for his possibilities of what he made. And not only that, it's more than a spectacular machine. It tells a story about us, our childhood, his imagination, the two coming together, this museum. Everything that is involved in Lima is right here. But as for me and my house, just like Joshua, I would say, if you ask me, Herb, is this a work of art? Repeatedly, yes, yes, yes. Thank you.